All right. So, I was told that the motivation for me to come here today was that we had a couple of hundred of our most important partners who had all just signed very important business plans with us for 2016. That true? Yeah? Yeah, people are not sure. So I realize it's been a long 2 days, but hopefully well worth your while. And I thought we'd have a chat about innovation. Very often, innovation is used in a sentence together with when describing Google. And very often I'm asked, well, how do you innovate? Like, how do you do innovation at Google? Can you teach us? And I find it very difficult. I find it very difficult because we don't have a recipe. And in fact, if you go around and talk to 10 different Googlers and ask them, tell us about innovation at Google, you will get 10 different answers. We don't have posters on the walls, we don't have a recipe, we don't indoctrinate people with an innovation process, but it's kind of part of who we are, it's part of how we think. And I thought what I'd do is share with you some of the mindsets that we try and adopt and live every day in all of our teams, everything from our engineering teams through to our sales teams. And the first thing I'll say is that I think we've stolen pretty much every single one of these mindsets. We didn't invent these, but we have managed to make them core to who we are and how we work. And I'd really invite you, as we go through this presentation and afterwards, to think about, well, how could I take these ideas or these mindsets back with me and use them in my work, in my business, for my clients? Okay, so that's the challenge I'm going to throw back to you as we go through this. And I'll try and share with you what it is that we do to challenge the norm, empower our people, focus on the user, not be afraid to fail, and to think 10x. And I'm going to share with you examples from Google, but also examples that I see in other industries and businesses that I regularly use as examples myself when I'm trying to explain this. So let's go. So the first one is challenging the norm, right? So we all know, I think, the moments that we do our best are the moments when we're most stretched. You know, the moment that you start to feel a little bit comfortable or that you've really got something nailed is the moment that you have to start to worry, because that's the moment that you are getting comfortable, right? So how do you leap into a new environment? Put yourself outside of your comfort zone, think outside the box. There's so many different ways of saying this, but how do you force yourself into that situation? An example from Google I'd give you is back in 2005, when we decided that we wanted to get into the mobile phone operating business. So we, at the time, took a couple of big bets. So first of all, everybody thought we were crazy. There was plenty of mobile phone operating systems in the world. We had BlackBerry, we had Apple, we had Nokia. You know, the world was well catered to. But we had an insight at the time, which was there wasn't an open mobile operating system, and we thought the world needed one. So that was the first bet. The second bet was that rather than trying to develop this in-house, what we would do is we would go and find somebody who really believed passionately in that vision, and we would bring them into the company if we didn't already have them, and we would invest heavily in them. And we took a big bet on a chap called Andy Rubin, who had even named the operating system after himself. Andy Android. Get it? So here was somebody who was so passionate about it and so full of self-belief that he even named the operating system after himself. And we invested heavily in this, and it's become a huge success. Right? So we've long passed a billion users of the Android operating system, and it's now installed in hundreds of different handsets that are sold every minute of every day around the world. So it's been a great success. Another example from the tech industry, I guess, is Netflix. And Netflix was born in 1997 with an insight by Reed Hastings of the impending arrival of the internet into every home in America. And he, being a movie buff, thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to get off my couch now when I wanted to watch a movie, and I could log on to my internet at home and somebody would send me the DVDs. right? And he built this great business called Netflix, where you can order your rental DVDs online. He worked out all of the different logistical and legal ramifications around copyright and rental and so forth to be able to build what became a really, really powerful business. And very quickly started to eat into the traditional bricks and mortar business of video rental. But he wasn't content to stop there. You know, he was already at the peak of that business, but he was continuing to think about what his users wanted, what were the trends in the industry, and figure out insights that were going to be the next things that changed his world. And in 2011, he went into one of his regular meetings with his exec team, and he sat down and talked to them about this idea he had. He said, you know, this business is going great, but we're seeing huge advances in computing power, in connectivity. You know, broadband is really penetrating all homes. And I think we're getting to a point where, you know, instead of sending people DVDs, we might be able to stream movies into people's homes, right? So we can kind of think about getting away from the logistics business and we can start streaming into their homes. The execs went, yeah, it sounds like a good idea, and yeah, we should work on that, right? Not really taking him too seriously, trying to figure out, you know, would they be involved in the plan? Would they not be involved in the plan? And to their surprise, 3 days later when they came into the office, Reed had moved the DVD operations business out of the building. And he said, we are now a streaming business. Let's get to work. That was in 2011. And literally overnight, he had transformed his business from being a DVD rental business into a streaming business. And his innovation has continued from there. If you just think about now what he's done in the whole world of production, right? The very first series that Netflix commissioned was House of Cards. Who's a House of Cards fan? You know, so we've got quite a few in the audience. So traditionally, in the world of TV production, if you were going to commission some programming, what you would do is you would go out and you'd commission a story, you'd produce a pilot, you'd test it with an audience, and you would then have a lot of discussion and decision-making around whether or not you'd invest in a series. Well, not Netflix. Netflix sat down and they looked at their data. And their data told them two things. Anything we've got with Kevin Spacey, hugely popular. Everything we've got with David Fincher, hugely popular. Right, let's get the two of them and commission 2 series of some program that we want them to go and create. And that was the decision made. Then we get the first series of House of Cards, which again is released in a single shot rather than having to wait to 7:30 every evening to watch the next episode of your favorite program. In one fell swoop, they completely transformed how they identify the ingredients behind program creation using their own data analytics, and then the distribution thereof, giving it to consumers and letting them decide how they want to consume it. And it's gone on. We have all of these other Netflix creations that have gone on to take the world by storm, and Netflix continues to grow and grow. So another theme that we have is around empowering your people. And really this is about giving people the power to innovate. You know, giving them control, giving them space, giving them the license to go out and to be brave within your business. One of the first things we try and talk about is creative confidence. Now, if you've read anything on the topic of innovation or creativity, and I'm sure many of you have, it's core to your businesses, one of the first things that people talk about is, you know, as a child, we are all creative people. But somehow, over, you know, decades of school and work, that gets beaten out of us. We're not allowed to be creative anymore. But it's really important that we give our folks license to be creative. And let me explain to you with the help of a video, which my daughter was very kind to star in. Let me explain to you what I mean by this creative confidence. So if we could roll the video, please.
Yeah.
You happy with it?
Yeah.
What do you like about it?
The butterfly and the sun and the sky and the grass and you. And
me?
Yeah.
Is there anything that's not good? Everything good?
Yeah.
Good.
I forgot about the shot, so this time I'm going to do the shots. So.
Okay. Very good. No shirt. I've got no clothes on.
Sorry, I'll do clothes this time. I'm okay.
Okay. Thank you. So, only my 5-year-old daughter would think I look good with no clothes on. But, you know, just think of that. You know, if I had asked each of you to turn around and draw the person next to you, right, you would have spent hours doing it. And then you would have turned around. When I asked you to show it to the model that you had just drawn, I promise you, you would have started out by saying, listen, I'm really sorry, I'm a terrible artist, but, and you would have been very apologetic about it. But the creative confidence that you have when you're a 4 or 5-year-old is everything is good. You can have any idea, and you're proud of it. And even if it's not perfect, you're still proud of it. So how do you bring that type of creative confidence into the minds of your people and into your everyday work? One of the ways in which you can really support this is a culture of yes and rather than no but. You know, very often when new ideas are brought into a room, brought into a room of experts, the initial reaction is, well, no, but you can't do that, and that's a ridiculous idea, and you will never have the resources, and, but that's just not really realistic, is it? And instead, if you approach it from a point of view of, yes, and what if we did this? So another example from Google is from Dan Ratner, who you see here on the bicycle. Dan was one of the engineers responsible for building our Street View cars. So these are the cars that we send driving around the world, creating the Street View maps. And Dan went on holidays to Spain and got frustrated when Google Maps wouldn't take him to his hotel, because his hotel was down a little narrow alleyway that was pedestrianized, that the cars from Street View clearly had not been able to pass through. And he said, well, that's ridiculous. So when his holiday was over and he went home, he went straight down to Home Depot and his local bike shop, bought a bike, bought a load of stuff, went and dismantled one of the Street View cars, much to everybody's dismay, and assembled this trike, which became the first foray of Street View into the unknown, if you like. So the world where cars had never gone before. And it's progressed further from there. We now have Street Views that ride around deserts on camels. We have Street Views on snowmobiles, we have Street Views in backpacks. So really, we've been able to go out and on the back of his innovation around something, we've been able to bring an awful lot more of the world to people. The same for Gmail. Gmail was born out of frustration of one of our engineers who was having real trouble finding the conversation threads. You used to get this stream of chronologically organized emails, and then when you wanted to figure out what somebody else had said, you'd be searching frantically through all of those emails trying to find out what was said at the beginning of the thread. So he created email. And this was something that was used by the engineers internally for a long time before we considered bringing it out and launching it into the public. My favorite example of creative confidence, though, is this one. Do we have anybody from Ogilvy in the audience? Nobody from Ogilvy? Right. So does everybody know Shreddies? Yeah? So if you're from the Anglo-Saxon world at all, Shreddies has probably been a staple part of your morning ritual at some point in your life. Shreddies is a breakfast cereal that has been around for about 60 years and has had moderate success, but for about the last 15 years had been receiving no investment and had been declining in popularity as there had been an explosion of choice in the whole world of cereal. So move forward now to a year or two ago, and the cereal portfolio, which was being managed by Ogilvy in Canada at the time, was reviewing all of their products and all of their marketing campaigns. And they were trying to come up with ideas that could inject new life into each of the brands. And Shreddies came up for conversation. And the usual response from all of the experts of, Shreddies, 60 years, no investment for 15 years, nobody's really going to take it seriously. And there was an intern in the room, a young intern who'd been with the company for 3 months, and his name was Hunter Somerville. And he picked up a Shreddy, and he said, well, I have an idea. And he said, it's not a square, it's a diamond. And that's exactly what happened in the room. Everybody laughed. And everybody laughed and said, don't be ridiculous. Hunter, go back, intern, you don't know what you're talking about. But the leader in the room didn't say no but or laugh. The leader of the meeting said, yes, and tell me more about that. Tell me more, Hunter. What do you mean? And he said, well, you know, the old Shreddies squares, they're kind of old and boring. But the new Shreddies diamonds, they're exciting, right? And a load of momentum built behind this. And I hate to admit it, but I think I spent 20 minutes last weekend as I was preparing this, looking at YouTube videos of people comparing old, boring square Shreddies and new, exciting diamond Shreddies, right? There's something like 55 Facebook groups who are arguing over whether old, boring or new, exciting diamond-shaped Shreddies are better. They have done taste tests. There are hours of YouTube videos of people doing taste tests of whether the old, boring or the new diamond ones are more tasty, right? It is fascinating. So it just goes to show you what a little bit of creative confidence and a little bit of yes and can do to something that's been around for 60 years and has no investment. We even now have a combo pack. And I've been down to the supermarket, and I tell you, I'm really disappointed. They don't have them in my supermarket. So if anybody knows where to get a combo pack of Shreddies, please do let me know, because I'm all about it. Right. So one of the other things that Google is relentless about, and hopefully famous for, is our focus on the user. And this has been core to everything we do. Sometimes, I think it's helped us gain the success and the traction that we have with our consumers. And it permeates every single part of our business. And here's a quote from Larry, that there's no substitute for personally watching and listening to real people. And he is somebody who does that to an obsessive amount. You know, pretty much every time I've heard Larry speak, internally or externally, you know, he's full of these observations he makes about what's going on in the world around him and trying to think about the insights he can glean from that and how he can then transform that into the business. You know, I was just at a session with him a couple of months ago. We were over in California. We'd had to bring in some big air conditioning, you know, air conditioning units on the back of trucks. So we were in this odd venue. And he walked in, he started talking about all of the insights he gleaned from just looking. He stood for about 10 minutes in the car park, much to everybody's amusement, looking at these big air conditioning trucks, trying to figure out why we had to bring air conditioning trucks and what were all of the things that he could invent to avoid the need for diesel-powered air conditioning trucks at our venues. So anyway, so I digress. But Larry is somebody who's obsessive about this user insight. I want to tell you this story about Doug Dietz and the power that thinking about your users, obsessively thinking about your users. And for people in the agency business, this is not thinking about your clients, but it's thinking about your clients' users and the power that that can bring. So Doug is a senior engineer with General Electric working in their medical equipment department. And Doug is world famous and has won all sorts of awards for this, which is the most advanced MRI machine available in the world today. These things sell for, I think, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Every hospital in the world who doesn't have one wants one, and they are incredibly accurate and detailed in terms of the information they can provide back to medical teams. But Doug was visiting a hospital one day where one of these things had been running for a while, and by chance was in the waiting room when it was a kids' hospital. And there was a young girl in the waiting room who was, you know, trying to be coaxed by the medical team and the parents to go for an MRI. And the kid was in hysterics. And it culminated in the medical team going, listen, we're just going to have to sedate her. Doug was horrified. Doug had spent the last year or two really feeling that he'd created something amazing for the world that was doing such good and giving such a tremendous insight and creating this immense positive impact on the patients' lives. But yet here was a 6 or 7-year-old girl who was in hysterics, frightened, scared to death of going into this big noisy machine and being left in there on her own. So Doug set about doing something. And at that time, about 80% of the kids in the hospital ended up having to be sedated before they went into the MRI machine. So Doug rebranded. This is exactly the same machine in exactly the same hospital, but it was rebranded. And now what happened was when any child was about to go for, or was scheduled for an MRI, whether they were in the hospital or just arriving at the hospital, it started out with them getting an invitation to go on a treasure hunt that culminated in Pirate Island, where they had to lie very, very still for fear that the pirates would find them. And it was this tremendous adventure. Only 10% of the patients now need to be sedated when they go into this machine. And again, it just gives you reinforces the idea that no matter how good the technology is or the product is, if you really don't understand the reaction of your users, you're probably missing a massive opportunity to make that experience even better. So something else that we do at Google. So it's all about failing. We have something called the Penguin Award, right? Now, just to explain why we call it the Penguin Award. The Penguin Award is for the person who has taken a leap into the unknown and has failed. When penguins are on an ice floe and they're going looking for food, what happens is they all kind of huddle around in a group, and they kind of huddle over. This is my penguin impression. Is it good? They all huddle over to the edge of the ice floe, and they look in, and eventually one of them dives in. If the penguin pops back up to the surface, they know it's safe, and they all go in, and they all go looking for food. But if he doesn't come back, they go, we're not going in there, and they'll go off somewhere else, right? And that person is left to fend for themselves. So we like to reward that brave engineer or person in whatever team who's taken a leap into the unknown and who has failed. And part of that story, part of that idea about kind of innovating and trying new things and being prepared to fail, it's also about prototyping. And prototyping is a very important part of what we do. Iterate fast, fail fast if you need to. If I tell you the story about Google Glass. So Google Glass was a concept, and they'd had some ideas. Some engineers had a meeting. They said, yeah, no, I'm pretty sure we could do it. OK, let's go and do it. And in 45 minutes, they built their first prototype. And there's a great picture of an engineer who's basically got whiteboards strapped to him, a laptop on his back. He's got sellotape around his head. There's chopsticks coming out of his ears. But in 45 minutes, they created their first prototype of Google Glass. And they figured they were onto something, but that prototyping was going to be really, really important. Now, we were used to prototyping a lot in the software world, and it's kind of easy. But in the hardware world, maybe not so easy. But we set about creating 20 prototypes a week. Everyone testing something new, iterating on the design and trying to improve on it. And we kept on going. Now, we pushed the glass prototype or beta product out into the market. It was available for people to buy. It wasn't a huge consumer success, but that's OK. We've learned a huge amount from it. And this is just to give you a sense. So there's some great research, and I'm happy to share the detail behind this, of looking across large numbers of organizations about what happens with prototyping and without prototyping. So without prototyping or low amounts of prototyping, what happens is you get a small number of things tried, you get a lot of slow failures, no fast failures, and moderate success. But if you have a huge amount of prototyping, people aren't afraid to go in and try something crazy. They are less likely to have slow failures. In fact, if they're into the whole prototyping thing, they're not committed to any one prototype. They're not tied to that one idea. They're quite happy to throw it out and start again. And you end up with a lot of fast failures. So these things are getting chucked in the bin a lot more frequently. But you end up with, comparatively, a lot more success. So this concept of prototyping in your business is really important. And for us, with Google Glass, even though it wasn't a huge commercial success in the consumer space, I certainly wasn't a big fan of walking down the road looking like a geek. In the commercial space, it was less of an issue. People didn't care how they looked. And the aesthetics weren't important, but being able to get huge amounts of information displayed visually while your hands were being occupied doing some important or technical task became much more important. So this is an example from Philips Healthcare, where they've developed some very advanced applications of Google Glass, obviously in an industrial, in this case a medical environment. And there's lots of commercial applications now which many companies have adopted. It just hasn't taken off in the consumer space. And we continue to iterate. We continue to build prototypes, and we continue to try and advance the technology and see where it can go. The other thing that we do is 10x. So we talk a lot about big ideas. And the idea of incrementality is something that we're afraid of, and Larry has drummed into us. You know, if you think about it, if somebody comes to you and says, I need a 10% improvement, the natural reaction is to go and take everything that you're doing and try and make it 10% better. But if somebody asks you to go and make it 10 times better, you will think very differently. In fact, you'll most likely throw everything that you know out, and you'll try and start from scratch. And that's what we try and do. And Larry often tells a story about, if you look at the Standard & Poor's S&P 500 from 1955 and you look at it today, it's something like 10 to 15% of the companies are still only here today, right? Think Kodak. You know, think of Kodak filing for bankruptcy protection in the same year that Instagram was bought for $1 billion plus, right? So it's about constantly trying to reimagine and tackle big problems. And this is how we do it. We look for a huge problem, right? And Larry talks about the toothbrush test. So his idea is 1 billion users need to be able, this needs to be a problem for 1 billion users every day. We need to believe that there's a breakthrough technology somewhere on the horizon, right? That's, within reach, but on the horizon. And that we've got some sort of crazy idea to try and bring all that together into a sweet spot where we'll develop an idea. So Google X is where we house a lot of those ideas today. You'll have heard of things like Project Loon, right? So great advances in mobile transmission technology on the horizon. Billions of users in the developing world who don't have any connectivity. How do we get it to them? Let's launch some balloons into the stratosphere. That's a great idea, right? Ridiculous to think that that would be even vaguely successful, yet we're proving that it can work. We're proving that it can work. We've now got networks, mesh networks of loon balloons floating around parts of the developing world, providing LTE-based access to large swathes of previously, and for a long, nobody's going to roll out fiber in those areas or even cell towers because it's too expensive and the volume of people aren't there. But it's very easy and very cheap to launch some balloons. And you don't have to be a big company to do it either. An example I'd choose from our early history would be Google Books, right? So the mission for Google always has been organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful to people. And this is in 2004. Larry said, well, it doesn't, we're not just talking about online information, it's the offline world as well. So let's go and put all of the world's books online, right? And to prove a concept, he got out his camera and his tripod, he got a metronome, and he got Marissa Mayer, and they stood there, and to the tune of the metronome and Larry pressing the buttons, Marissa turned the pages, and we digitized our first book. And today we've got over 30 million books that have been digitized and are now available online as part of Google Books, and that journey continues. So you can have these really wild, crazy ideas, even if you're a small company with limited resources. You just have to be bold. And you have to think, yes, and how can we build on that? And here's one of our more recent examples. So a short video here about a new project that we've recently launched. So Keith, you could roll that video, please.
So there's this giant power plant in the sky, and it's creating free energy for anyone to catch. But most people aren't catching it because even though it could save them money on their electric bills, getting started can be pretty frustrating. There's all this stuff to figure out, like how many panels do you need? Who's going to install them? How much would you actually save? And how do you tell if your house even gets enough sun? a lot of people ask Google these kinds of questions. So we started looking for a better way to give them answers. And that's when one of our engineers got an idea. If people are getting lost trying to find answers about solar, why don't we give them a map? We could take the information that's already in Google Maps and use it to show how much sunlight falls on a roof. Then we could combine that with all the other stuff people need to figure out and create kind of a treasure map of solar energy. It could show you how much solar power your roof can generate and how much you could save. Then it could even point you towards an installer in your neighborhood instantly. It's an idea we're calling Project Sunroof. And right now we're just starting with a few places, like Boston, where the Sunroof team is from, the San Francisco Bay Area, where Google is from, and Fresno, where one of our engineers' mom is from. Pretty soon it'll grow to include the entire country, and maybe even the whole world. That way anyone, anywhere, can start catching energy from that power plant in the sky.
One engineer with an idea to solve the energy crisis, you know? And it's simple, it's using all of the information and the things that are already out there and creating just a website and a web app that's launched a whole new industry in the cities where it is. His mum is delighted down in Fresno, let me tell you. So, you know, again, I'd encourage you to think about the things that I talked through here, the ideas, the themes, the things that we've stolen from others, that we use to drive innovation and how we think about and approach our work. So just to refresh, it's how do you challenge the norm? So even though other people are doing it, it doesn't mean that you can't have a unique approach or that you can't upset the status quo. How do you empower your people, give them the creative confidence, right? Think and talk about yes and rather than no but. Focus on the user. Like Doug Dietz, do you really understand, do you really have the insight about how that amazing product is being used every day by the users who interact with it? Are you happy to fail? Like, do you celebrate? Do you give somebody an award for being a failure? You know, that's very certainly not in the European mindset generally. And finally, think 10x. How do you have those big ideas where rather than the 10% incremental, that you're really going for the 10x idea? And my favorite quote from one of the best innovators of all time that I'll leave you with is Henry Ford, which is, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Thankfully, he didn't always listen to his users. Thank you.